We are super proud to announce that Stay Plugged In is now sponsored by HyperX for our online events for the month of August. Prizes will include a Cloud Stinger wireless headset and a Cloud Stinger wired headset for our Turbo Tuesday tournaments for the first and second winning teams. And then for our Valorant tournaments, which are every other week on Thursdays and Fridays, that will be the Alloy Origins Core Mechanical Gaming Keyboard, HX Red, and the Pulsefire FPS Pro Gaming Mouse, which the keyboard is for first place and the mouse is for second place. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. Today, we are joined by GABE REN, aka Mamba. He is the CEO and founder of Mamba Mode Gaming, I'd say right there below tier one professional organization in the Valorant space specifically right now. Really trying to look into becoming that one of those premier brands as the new game Valorant expands. So without taking the words too much out of your own mouth, Gabe, go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us where your passion started in esports and how those developed over time and took you to being the CEO and founder of Mamba Mode Gaming as you are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle, and appreciate the invite from the great guys at the Stay Plugged In crew. As Kyle said, my name's Gabe, and I'm currently the founder and managing our Valorant team in Mamba Mode Gaming. In terms of the esports space, I've always played video games from day one. And when I was younger, it was one of those problems where I was playing too much and needed to make sure I got the other things like schoolwork and stuff done. As I got older, I realized the Call of Duty montages I watched, to the Super Smash Bros. Games I played, to the Dota 2 scene that I followed, had multiple career paths outside of just being a player. Not going to say that I didn't believe in myself at one point to play at the highest level, but I think after meeting some of the players on my team, especially in the Valorant space, I realized that my specific passions and talents lie outside of the game as well. And building a great team together and competing at the highest level is an amazing feeling, even if on my end, I don't have that talent and ability to play at the highest level. So as Kyle said, right now, we're currently fighting through the thick and thin, trying to make a name for ourselves in the Valorant scene. It's a very competitive scene, especially in the North American space. As y'all might have heard, there's been a lot of signings recently from TSM and T1 in the early days to recently with the Renegades and Team Envy. So there's plenty of competition. We're looking to kind of break out that tier 2 scene and get into the tier 1 scene, but We're definitely putting in the work and looking forward to what's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really nothing more exciting to me than seeing a fresh title as in Valorant come out and see what the scene kind of takes. I love Riot's approach right now, and they're kind of leaving it open, right? Obviously, they have some control over the major brands that are producing tournaments in these premier events. Obviously, it's still their game, but from that community and that tier 2 and tier 3 level, they're kind of just like, the community can do what they want, and then we'll see kind of who does it best and take those ideas and apply it to the professional scene, which is yet to be developed, and I'm sure it'll be here in a year or a little bit more. But kind of my first question for you, we'll get back to that subject about, fresh titles, but my first question for you is, what sets MMG apart, or going into the designing process of, creating this org in MMG? What are your focuses to set yourself apart? As a premier tier 1 brand, being that is your goal.
Yep. So to provide some higher level preface, I think for me as someone who starts an org, you hear about that less probably than players wanting to become tier 1 players, just because I think the time frame for a successful org is a long time frame. T1 didn't become a $100 million org within 3 months. Same for TSM, Team Liquid, EG, etc. So for me, when I took a look at the org side, I felt like in the tier 2 and tier 3 space scene, although content creation and branding is essential for all organizations and players in the space, in my heart, at the core of an esports org, I think there should be one goal. Everything should stem from winning. Winning games, winning tournaments, winning titles. Your branding, videos, all the funny IRL stuff, that's an extension of winning. I don't care about your esports team if you're not winning. Just like in traditional sports. I love the Lakers. As you guys can probably tell, MMG is named after Kobe Bryant and in honor of him as well. And for me, I think that Mamba mentality of locking in, being the hardest worker in the room, even if you have the most talent in the room, that's something I want our players, our staff, me, everyone under the umbrella of the organization to embrace, because at the very top, when people are separated by a percent or a fraction of a percent, the only way to move up that ladder is elbow grease. There's no really substitute for that. I'd say beyond kind of the Mamba part of the branding and really having winning in its center from day one is taking a look at from a player end. I really do think as an org, we try to be very transparent with our players. And I believe down the road, especially over the next few years, as more money flows in the scene from the current amount of eyeballs that are already in the scene, players will have much greater influence in esports. I take a look at the NBA analogy I always like to use with LeBron James now having not just 3 titles, MVPs, but LeBron has really pushed the envelope forward for players to have a greater voice in the NBA, from recently raising $100 million plus for Uninterrupted to have his own media platform, to being, I think, the only player in the NBA to receive a salary from September to May instead of the full year. I think star players in esports are going to be more influential from an organization standpoint in the future, because everything stems from them. Without winning, you really have nothing. And I want to make sure if we're creating not a new business model per se, but if we're evolving upon what's been successful so far, let's start off by where we think the market's going to be in a few years.
Absolutely. I think there's those 2 points. I'd love to explore a little bit more, and kind of going back to that winning mentality. A lot goes into winning, and that's a pretty blanket statement. I say that a little bit too often maybe, but winning, a lot of people have different views of how to win in any sport, but I think it's even more so in esports because the space is so new and no one's figured out that, regimented practice schedule or the way to facilitate, what's the best way to win championships and train to win championships, right? We see it kind of like in an analogy in football, right? Sometimes coaches drive their players too hard in that later half of the season towards the championship, and they fall off because they're too tired. They pick up a few knocks, a few slight injuries. And the coaches are like, oh, dang, we need to tone it down. Or, so they didn't ramp it up enough, and then the game is way too physical for them and they get overrun, right? So that's kind of forms a question a little bit for you is, how do you help, prepare your players for that winning mentality, that winning success? Are there any particular practice regimens that you like to implement or focuses within the team to really facilitate that success?
Sure. I think that's a great question on my end. At a high level, although in title I'm a founder and CEO and whatever you call it, those things are meaningless in the sense of, from a responsibility standpoint, I told my guys from day one, my sole job is to do everything in my power so you can practice the game more and play at a higher level without worrying about anything else. What that looks like on paper is, I think it's very important to have a structure in place, whether you scrim 3 hours every other day, 1 hour a day, to give players some visibility is always important so they can plan around their schedules. And I understand, as a player myself, when I play, I just want to play. I don't have to worry about anything else, looking at videos. I just want to play 9 hours a day. But getting quality and not just quantity is important. So setting that structure up for any team, I think, is critical over the long term. In addition, I think beyond playing practices, playing tournaments, something we've tried to embrace here as a full team is, after every scrim, and especially at the end of a tournament or after a long day, after a tough loss, we always have post-game, post-scrim, post-tournament feedback sessions where I've really been trying to lead the team in the sense of, I'm a big believer in the fact that the day someone stops telling you how you can get better is the day they stop caring about you. So whenever people are giving you feedback, that's a sign they think you can be better. So I think being top players, when you're doing poorly in a game and someone is giving you feedback, certainly it's understandable why you feel like you're being attacked or you're being called a bad player. So I think it goes both ways, making sure when players are giving feedback, it's specific. And then when you're receiving the feedback, don't take it as they think you're dog at the game. It's more of they realize you're already great. You can be better. We want to win. So I think those two things are pretty important in the space.
Yeah, that's incredibly well put. And I love those tidbits there. I think that kind of ties into constructive criticism in esports right now. It's very difficult to give and take for a lot of players. And I think a lot of it just stems from like the nature of esports as we've grown up, right? It's so new, it's so fresh. A lot of it's online. A lot of it isn't in that, physical, I'm next to someone setting where they don't understand it, like, hey, I'm trying to help you, right? Or you're trying to help me. Like you said, it's kind of taken as an attack rather than like, hey, I know you're better and you're not playing up to your potential right now, so let's fix that, right? How do we fix that? Is it a slight tweak to the strat? Is it resetting the mind? Is it, a 5-minute walk, right? Is it a glass of cold water? Whatever it is, those are more tiny things, but, obviously there's a ton more in game that's so important to highlight, which I love that you bring it up, and it's extremely well put there. Kind of going on to my next question, and that last response, the one before, and that duality of MMG and what sets it apart is, approaching it from the organizational standpoint of, being very visible and clear cut with your players, which I think is a massive issue in the esports space, the lack of that, right? We've seen, I think, in every single, tier 1 or tier 2 title right now, there's drama within orgs about, contracts and players getting, let's just say messed with.
Yep.
Put it lightly. They lose money or get cut dry because that the understanding of legal contracts isn't really there yet from the player perspective. So kind of dive into a little bit more of that and why that's important and looking towards the long term, what that really enables for not only your players but hopefully other orgs follow suit and take your model of that visibility and clear cutness. And what that kind of enables and allows for long-term growth.
Sure. I'd say on a player end, it's obviously understandable why they're not legal experts. That's not their responsibility. Certainly, you have a personal responsibility to read through a contract and make the best decisions for yourself. But I don't think that means, hey, as an org, you should be throwing in a bunch of gotchas, and it's up to the players to find each one and say, like, hey, let's change this. I think on my end, the guiding principle I try to use with contracts, legal things, and really any sort of tough discussion is I tell my guys, hey, I'm a straight up person. I want to have these talks up front because in my life experience so far, I've realized if you don't have those conversations up front in your head, you might feel okay because you're like, oh, we're not talking about this icky stuff. But those icky conversations happen regardless of not you're happening face to face. So on my end, I'd always rather hear it face-to-face. What are the expectations? How can I be doing better? Because I think behind closed doors and without proper communication, that's when you believe X, someone believes Y, and really conflict stem from that. From an org perspective, I can say we signed the main roster probably 2-ish weeks ago now. And those conversations were tough, from negotiating on an org end, what we expect, to on a player end. They obviously want to be compensated for their time and have performance bonuses built in for their salaries as well. So for me, I was in Discord calls with the guys for multiple hours over multiple days, having those conversations in person, walking through line by line what this means. And I think beyond having those open conversations, what means a lot from a player end and also what means a lot on my end is actions speak louder than words. So when the players give me feedback on a clause in the contract, for example, there was some feedback given about the transfer / buyout clause in our contract. And on my end, when I send an updated draft back to the players after that convo, a few hours after our call, I think on their end, they can see, hey, Mamba's the guy that really cares about this. He might not agree with everything we say, but he's going to give it a fair ear. And on my end as well, when the players are asking for X, and I'm like, hey, there's no way I can do X, but maybe I can look at this. And they take a look at it with compromise in the middle, and they're like, you know what? That's fair. To me, that's that sign where, hey, they're listening, and we're all meeting in the middle to make sure everyone's happy.
Exactly. I mean, it's a group effort, and I think, it speaks to how new the industry is and the players not being as well versed and then orgs not being as well versed, but also as long as everyone's coming together and figuring out what's best for the team so you can go win championships, which is the goal, then everyone's happy, right? If you make it to, winning a 50K right now, there's a little bit bigger, but that's a pretty big prize pool. You win a 50K, I think everyone can be like, you know what, that was worth it. A week of contract negotiation is just a blip in the road at that point. So, coming together there is awesome and beautiful to see. Kind of switching gears here, talking about Valorant specifically, right? Because that's a hot topic in esports in general because, it's Riot's flagship, dual flagship with League, of course. But it's brand new. There's no pro scene that's, supported by Riot yet. They've already said, hey, we're going to wait a year or two, see what the community takes us to. So kind of speak to a couple questions here of like why you chose Valorant, why you chose to get into that space, why you think, it's a great game, it's going to last to that esports title. I have my own kind of understanding, but, for the viewers out there, Speak to, why you think it's going to be so big. And then also speak to the growth that you think it's going to come out of Valorant and what the potential is if, Riot and the community pulls it off correctly in that kind of holistic, inclusive fashion.
Yep. So for the viewers out there and listeners who maybe haven't seen the game yet, I would definitely recommend you check out a match, preferably a Mamba mode gaming match if you can. But the overall description is you can imagine Valorant as kind of a 5v5 tactical shooter that is similar to Counter-Strike and the core fundamentals of taking those aim battles and having good positioning, but at the same time having a little bit of spice in there with abilities that you can kind of compare, I'd say maybe most similarly to an Overwatch type of game. Yeah. On my end, I'd say there's really 3 big reasons why I hopped into Valorant. As a player, I think this is most important. I like the game. I play the game. I got in 2 days after closed beta. Would have been first today if I got those codes on Twitch, but the drops took a while to come in. Yeah. So being able to play the game, not at the highest level, but to queue games and really understand and enjoy what's going on, I think that's critical from my end, or else I wouldn't really be able to understand the weeds of what's going on. Mm-hmm. On a second end, I think I'm excited about Valorant from a developer perspective because Riot, League of Legends is the biggest esport in the world. You take a look at its longevity, you take a look at the multiple numbers of top tier players and brands that have grown out of there. Heck, TSM was founded based off of their League of Legends success, right? So for me, seeing on a developer end, hey, these guys have experience in this space. They've done successful stuff before. That gives me confidence as a player and on an org end. This is probably going to be around for a while if they execute correctly because they've done it before. I'd say lastly, on a business side, I take a look at the market, all right? What sort of 5v5 tac shooters are out there? Counter-Strike, obviously made by Valve, has dominated the scene for the past decade. So even if this wasn't esports, let's say this was an ice cream business, and you got one guy making ice cream down the road, and he's been doing that for 10 years, when another guy comes in, competition always makes the market better. Yeah. So on my end, I look at it as, hey, these two games are going to be pushing each other, and finally now we'll have another competitor in this space. And I'd love to jump in on this newer one, given I think there's more opportunity and uncertainty here at the moment, and try to use our skill differential to make a name for ourselves during this newer time when people are all trying to make it big.
Absolutely. I love seeing the Valorant, space kind of develop. Obviously, we have our more tier 3 tournaments with Stay Plugged. Yep. Just, weekly stuff. Give, a competitive platform for players to play, which I think, is a great base, right? I don't think being that tip of the top tier 1 50Ks, maybe down the line at some point, but not anytime soon that, T1 and nursery gamers can take all of that they want. Yeah. But I love to see these spaces kind of grow. And that kind of leads me to my last question. Kind of, could be on the same topics we've been talking about, completely different. It's really open-ended for you, Gabe. It's what one thing do you think is either missing or needs to improve on for the esports industry in a holistic fashion to take that next step, right? Obviously, it's not going away. It's, the fastest growing industry in the entire world, basically. It's already blown past a lot of other traditional sports leagues. Really just NFL is the next one to beat, and then soccer. What one hole or one thing that you think that could really kind of leap it to go from like, this is massive within the community and on the fringe of community to be like mainstream accepted? You see it on ESPN every night. You see it when you go to a sports bar to have a drink with your friends or sit down with your family and it's all on the TV, right? What is that one thing for you?
In my mind, if I'm being candid, I think we need more players in the development space like Stay Plugged In. And to you guys listening, I promise Kyle didn't make me say that or give me that question beforehand. It's, if I look at any industry, right, I always use the NBA as an analogy because I think there's a lot of overlap between sports and esports, and I'm a big NBA fan. So on my end, if there's no AAU, boys and girls club basketball, in terms of development as you get into the NBA, collegiate basketball, the NBA would not exist. Maybe it would, but the level of talent you can identify, the number of jobs that are outside of the player side, coaches, managers, staff, that all comes from people that have been in this space for a while and have had pipelines to mature and develop. So for me, when I look at esports, when I first saw the esports scene, the only thing I knew about were these top players making millions of dollars from the biggest tournaments and having the biggest sponsors from Logitech to G Fuel to XYZ. But what I didn't see at the time, and what I think about a lot more now, isn't just those players, but how did they get there, right? Everybody started off from trying out a game, realizing they liked it, from a player and realizing you wanted to play competitively. going to the tier 2, tier 3 trenches like we are right now. From a staff end, as a caster, all the casters I love watching on Valorant, like Pansy. How did Pansy end up where she is, right? She had to have cast her first game somewhere.
Yeah.
Where did she hear about that? Where did she get that opportunity? So I think in order to make esports more accepted and also just increase its awareness and people understand where it actually is to have children at a younger age, and even people going into their collegiate years, to have that structure in college, whether it's scholarship or other opportunities there, to really build some sort of fundamental development path where if you are really good at these roles, this is kind of how you move forward. If you're not really good at those roles / don't want to pursue it anymore, that's okay. I played basketball when I was younger in these leagues, and that's a big reason why I continue to follow the NBA. Just because I don't play anymore and I was never a top player for sure doesn't mean that experience hasn't given me a better understanding of what's going on and really kind of the different career paths in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, like you said, it's exactly what we're trying to develop, or we are developing at Stay Plugged In, is that idea of taking, hey, I'm a kid, I love to play games. What can I do with it? Like, where can I go play? Where can I pursue my passions? And it's not only competitive gaming, it's casting, production, video editing, coding, all these very parallel industries that all feed into it, right? How are games made? They're coded. How are, streamers and content creators develop their online portfolio? Video editing, right? And there's a ton of skills associated with those inherent skills that are very hard to define. But giving them the platform to pursue that is that next step. And I totally agree with you there. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We have run over, but totally worth it. Having these conversations are some of the highlights of my day in particular. So Gabe, aka Mamba, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. It was an absolute pleasure, discussing the esports space, especially what MMG is going to do. I love to see orgs with your mission and your ideology behind it. I think it's a great setup for success. And you've already won 2 of our tournaments, so we'll see how many more you can get and keep climbing that ladder to maybe catch some of those 50Ks or 20Ks. So good luck. Real quick, Gabe, go ahead, plug yourself, plug MMG, tell us the viewers where we can find you and keep up to date, so we can see that long-term success happen in real time.
Awesome. Thanks so much again for having me. And on my end, you can find me first name, last name on Twitter, aka at Gabe REN. On an org end, it's at Mamba Mode Gaming on Twitter. We'll be playing in more Stay Plugged In stuff for sure. All the players' Twitch streams and info can be found via there as well. So just use the Twitter, and I'm sure all the associated links will guide you wherever you need to go.
Exactly. Twitter's a great land for finding people, especially in the esports space. It's kind of where we all exist in social media fashion. So once again, thank you to all the viewers. Stay healthy and stay happy out there in the precarious times with the current pandemic. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. And ultimately, stay plugged in. Awesome.